Today's event on the future direction for disability entrepreneurship research is part of the CIMR Debates in Public Policy series. And this session first introduces and then debates issues in research in disability entrepreneurship, both in terms of content, but also in terms of methodological and data challenges. So today's event is chaired by Jacqueline Winstanley. She's founder and CEO of Universal Inclusion and the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network, and is Secretariat to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. We're also very pleased that Jacqueline is a visiting fellow here at CIMR. Jacqueline collaborates on research networks and impact with the CIMR director, Professor Helen Lawton-Smith. And now, without further ado, I would like to thank Jacqueline for sharing the event today and hand over to her. Jacqueline, please.
Thank you very much, Marion. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event today. And apologies, I am, like most people, I think, in the UK, just getting over a lurgy. So I'm going to do my best. And if I have to stop for a drink, I apologise in advance. So today is a very exciting session, I feel, because research is essential to taking this issue forward, particularly when we're talking about influencing policy direction. The first start of the session, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, also put this in context, and you'll then see 3 presentations and an opportunity to ask questions, followed by a panel discussion. And we're really delighted to, again, have you join us this afternoon. So a little bit of background. I am a practitioner, I'm a disabled entrepreneur, and my own experience is what led to the work that I've developed and my particular interest in research in respect of using research in a collaborative way to test out solutions, academically validate them, and then go on to actually inform and influence parliamentarians and also policy direction that will benefit the sector as a whole. So I just want to put things in context. So when we're considering the creation of enterprise by disabled people, we know from Rowell et al. That there was a lack of academic research in this area, in contrast to other marginalised groups. And we've put some references in the programme for you today that you can have a look at to get a little bit of background information. So in context, this is a very new area of research in terms of the academic validation. In the past, it's been looked at alongside entrepreneurship in its broadest context. And there has been specific research that's looked at, for example, women in enterprise, ethnic minority enterprise, not my particular term, but in terms of the ethnic minorities and migrants. And again, you can see those references. So when we start from a process of considering where is this going to go in the future, that's really important. And this is a sector that, unsurprisingly, if you consider the sector and the disabled community in every other aspect of their lives, and they will consider that in terms of academic research, it's almost like the last bastion. And although it's the last bastion, it's incredibly important. We know from collaboration between practitioners, and in particular the Inclusive Entrepreneur Network and the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, and academia, and again we've put some references in there for you, that's provided us with good anecdotal evidence in terms of that, what are the issues, what are the barriers that are faced. The early stage research has also given us some clear insights into possibly strands of research going forward, but it's really important in order to shift the sort of strategies and policies on disability and enterprise that we have that academic validation. So the collaborations highlighted the need for further academic research specific to disability. So in the first instance, not to look at it in a sort of in the broader the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but there's a need for academic research in its own right in respect of disability and the creation of enterprise. We know that it has a significant role within the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but we've not collected that data as yet. and particularly academic data on how policy directed can support its growth. We've seen emerging themes for future research, which have identified key barriers, such as access to finance, combined bespoke business, health and wellbeing support, practical aids and adaptations, access to market, conflicting policy intent and administration, and a lack of role models and a general perception on what a disabled entrepreneur may be able to do. Good practice examples speak to the importance of lived experience and ethical collaboration by way of inviting disabled people to become visiting fellows and/or co-authors, ensuring that future research is not done for or to, but with. And that's a key aspect of a commitment, really, that the disabled community want from any organisation that they engage with, and particularly within academia. This collaboration, and in particular the ethical collaboration, is proving to be invaluable in providing academically validated recommendations on sustainable policy directives in this field. For example, the groundbreaking research currently being undertaken, which has been commissioned by the APPG for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, sponsored by Innovate UK, and in collaboration with the Innovation Caucus, CIMR Birkbeck, and Universal Inclusion, will provide much needed insight into the very essence of the disabled entrepreneur. The research project goes beyond the traditional the who, the what, the why, the where, the when, capturing the hitherto untapped potential in terms of reducing the disability employment and pay gap, and increasing the health and well-being and socioeconomic status of those who choose this route. Of particular interest is the contribution of the disabled entrepreneur in respect of inclusive economic growth. The methodology for this research project was instigated and designed in collaboration with disabled people and disabled entrepreneurs, whose representation within the project's advisory boards, focus groups, and distribution of surveys reinforces the ethical collaboration and inclusivity within the research project. And I'm just emphasising inclusivity because this is a significant consideration when taking research forward in this area. This workshop aims to share debate and explore the underlying assumptions and understand the current way of doing research in disability entrepreneurship. In addition, we aim to identify and present challenges in researching disability entrepreneurship, including new directions for research, opportunities, e.g. around subject content and methodology, to generate more meaningful impact from research. As we stated earlier, we're now going to go on to the presentations. Our speakers will have 15 minutes, at the end of which time there'll be 5 minutes from questions. You can put your questions in the chat or indicate to us at that time if you do have a question. So I'm quite excited now to introduce you to Ning Baines and Tay. Now, I always struggle to pronounce Tay's last name, but Klangboonkrong. If I've got that incorrect, I apologise in advance, from the University of Leicester. And it's lovely to see Ning again, because we had a conversation some time ago, and who could have envisaged we'd be doing this together. So thank you, Ning and Tay.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, everyone. And then, well, thank you for the opportunity to that you have been given to us to present, and then to be part of this exciting opportunity, and then this exciting topic. So our presentation will be about essential competencies for entrepreneurs with disability, and this is the early report from the field work. And my name is Ning Baines, and then I have my co-author and like the project, the co-work in the project is Dr. Tay Klangboonkrong, and we both are from the University of Leicester. So the next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please.
Next.
Well, Tay and I, we did the review of the literature. And then, and we got it on the disability entrepreneurship research. And from that review, we used the lens of the individual and opportunity nexus to give a critical reflection of the existing works in the area of disability entrepreneurship. And what we have observed is there's a separation between individuals as entrepreneurs and overcoming challenges, simply because in the entrepreneurship narratives, becoming an entrepreneur is always having the hero narratives to explain an entrepreneur. And then, well, while there's a multi-level nature of challenges that this group of entrepreneurs will need to overcome, and then, well, it begs or raise the questions about how fit for purposes is entrepreneurship with this group of entrepreneur. So the this implies that there's some sensitivity about the context that we need to be aware of, and we need to know about it. And then, well, there's some non-economic value of entrepreneurship that happen. That take place because becoming an entrepreneur is not just about making a profit, but then it's also about self-fulfilling. And then the other implications is about the participation and then the empowerment of to become an entrepreneur. So and this is the focus of our current project. So, and this is and with this, it gives us the inspiration to go and then collect the data. So with the field work, we interviewed 25 disabled entrepreneurs, and then and we receive support in recruiting the disabled entrepreneurs from the Circle Foundation, and then these disabled entrepreneurs are from all over the UK, and then also they in the various stages of their business, starting from just started or having only a few months into the business, to those entrepreneurs who's very well established and successful. And the topics that we interviewed them cover their experience, also the barriers that they are facing and challenges encountered, and how they deal with overcoming these challenges, and the skills needed to be successful, and then the desired support. Then in the preliminary finding, so we found that the barriers, and it really replicate on what Jacqueline just explain about the barriers of that entrepreneur with disabilities are facing, which is social prejudice, the lack of funding, the lack of skills, and then the physical access, and then the health limitation, a lack of network, a lack of support system. And all these barriers, some of them resonate with the barriers faced by normal entrepreneurs or able entrepreneurs, or faced by the other groups of entrepreneurs, like female entrepreneurs or migrants entrepreneurs. And then the support needs, that their needs are the creativity, and then the opportunity sensing and seizing, and then the planning and management, and the need support in terms of resource mobilization, and then the experiential learning, self-confidence, self-awareness, and then tenacity and resilience. So what the key takeaway and the first impression here is there's still discrepancy. The discrepancy still remain between challenges that the entrepreneur with disabilities are facing and the perceived solution or the perceived support that they're currently receiving. So from here, I probably hand it over to Tay to finish it off.
Finish it off. Is that aggression that I hear? No, just kidding. Hi, I'm Tay. So we're going to look at a bit of an example of what our participants, the disabled entrepreneurs, actually said. So if we're looking at especially the words in yellow, we can see that on the surface of it, there's very little difference to, it alludes to what Ning has said, very little difference to the usual origin stories of any entrepreneurs, regardless of physical condition, gender, ethnicity, or whatever. So we have a good dose of, access to support network and learning from your support network. What do you do if you don't have network is another story. And of course, we've got determination, mindedness, stubbornness, and so on, which explained how these entrepreneurs have been keeping going against all the odds. So now, when it comes to descriptive findings, these are perhaps not something that's entirely easy to work with, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that came to be. So, but what do we make of this? So that's the kind of the key question when we got the data. So what do we make of this? Is it more of the same? There are indeed, in terms of research and data analysis, I think early career people or doctoral students might be interested in this sort of thing. So there are a few different ways we can take this forward. First is to say, we hereby have validated the virtue of individual ruggedness, or things like you can do anything if you put your mind to it, and here's the proof. So I'd imagine that if you're very much an empiricist, you might go this way, but perhaps by the fact that you signed up for this session, you're probably not. The view is that, so that's as an implications from our previous literature review. Our viewpoint is that doing more of the same doesn't really address any of the blind spots, of which are many in entrepreneurship research and education to begin with. But within that, so there are limitations to traditional entrepreneurs, let's say, and there's a real significant level of ableism that has been embedded into that. So doing more of the same wouldn't actually help anybody. So if we're trying to be useful, then that's probably not going to be very useful. But the other extreme is for us to unpick the societal context and launch into social critique, which I really love to do. And to some extent, we have been doing that as an implication from our first systematic literature review. But being use-inspired research and with our intention to actually use this to inform something useful for the next generation of aspiring entrepreneurs who may be disabled, that extreme is also not going to be that much useful either. So what are we going to do? So when we talk about what we make of the findings in terms of further use, I would say whichever way we go, there's a lot hanging on the researcher's normative stance. Now, if you want to be very scientific and proper, you're probably not going to go too much into, the normative stance of things. But to me anyway, it's we have suggested this also from the literature review. But to be useful, there's going to be some normative element in whatever we're doing in terms of research. And that's probably one of the few hills I'm willing to die on in this area. So if there's a new research student here, I'm not sure who's participating. Yeah, this is also why you should really be paying attention to whatever research philosophy training that you're going to get, because this sort of thing, when it comes to moving the research forward in a way that's beneficial to many people involved, not just for you to publish, it's going to be quite a messy and sometimes at times could be very contentious, especially if you work across the divide and so on. So philosophical underpinning and normative things aside, even if we talk more straightforwardly about data analysis, there is pretty much always going to be something called survivorship bias. And that's a kind of limitation that's built into most of the entrepreneurship research that we can see, because for our research anyway, these are the people who have been rather successful with navigating the existing structure that was made to exclude them to begin with. So, but for those who didn't succeed, the same goes for other types of entrepreneurs. If they didn't succeed, we couldn't find them, we couldn't ask them questions. So there's that kind of limitation that feeds into how we're going to make sense of the data here. But then if you're thinking that this is a natural order of things and this is how it's going to work, then we would be bounced back to the first question, as in, what's your normative direction for these research, which we're not going to do just for now. But that's a huge impact of what we're trying to do with the data. So it's not just the individual or the agency, the heroism of a person, and it's not going to be just the structure that we have to play into, the structure that's going to confine us. So it's not either or. So when it comes to realistically developing competences and thinking about the competences, there's going to be both the elements that could be taught, the hard bits, and some others that are going to be built and grown through socialization. Maybe on one side, there's, robustness, resilience, and the other side would be advocacy, maybe. So, but that's probably a topic for another day. That's quite a challenging one. But the key point here is that whatever we do, it cannot and must not be separated from the disability rights movement. So this is essential, especially for researchers like us who came from entrepreneurship instead of other social studies. So different parts of the puzzle will have to inform one another. So in the first instance, I talked about ableism earlier. This is to avoid harm being caused, especially given how things are working in most of the entrepreneurship development and education program. The second thing is that what good would it be for our training or development program if it alienates the community and the people who advocate for this community? So we want to have the legitimacy in order to continue to engage with the people we say we would like to work with. Yes. Last slide. Yep. Last slide. So that's what are the girls doing here? So to me, one of the biggest challenges in the minority or non-traditional entrepreneurship is that despite the best intention, we struggle to imagine anything different. So sometimes, just to help myself, this is what I usually do when I struggle to imagine. I like to make an analogy with the current efforts to encourage more girls' participation in maths and sciences. So now no one in their right mind would say, make the girls study more math or put quadratic equation in their bedroom or something like that. We talk about context, but when it comes to promoting entrepreneurship for non-traditional people, we struggle. Why is that? Is that our preconception about entrepreneurship or about disabled people, or both? So maybe, yeah, we can look at what questions you have. If there's any, I would be interested to see what tickles your curiosity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ning and Tay. That's very, very interesting. And it's particularly pleasing to see the recognition of this being quite complex in terms of ableism, not alienating the community, the way research is going to be conducted going forward. We know that as a community, in any aspect of perhaps gathering data because of personal experiences, there's sometimes a reluctance to do that. So a big part of this is absolutely gaining the engagement and trust of the community to be able to make this meaningful research going forward. Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, all, if we've had any questions in the chat or anybody has indicated they have a question.
No, there's no questions in the chat. But if anyone would like to ask a question, please feel free to post it in the chat or raise your hand.
I think we're coming back to the
Yes.
I think
Yes,
I was going to say
do-
I
we
think
do
we're coming
have a
back to the
question.
panel
Yes.
later.
Yeah, Mutu. Hi, Mutu.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Sorry, I think
Hi.
I'm seeing now. Hi. Thank you very much, both of you, for the great question. Sorry, great presentation. And Jacqueline, so is it a clarification question time, or can I ask any question at this point?
We've allocated 5 minutes at the end of each presentation for you to ask questions of the particular presenters.
Okay, that's perfect. So great presentation. But in terms of the research side, yes, you did mention that you get the quite similar set of what you call the support that might be useful for any entrepreneur. But I'm just wondering whether you could dig into your data further to understand some specific details. For instance, when you say they need help with the development of their network, would there be a specific type of network that they would prefer? Or when you say that they need support in terms of planning, but would there be a specific type of planning that they would need compared to traditional entrepreneurs? So I think there might be still a way forward with the data that you have got by looking into some specific details, specific unique elements of the common support that you have already outlined. It's just a suggestion. Might or might not work.
Yes, thank you, Mutu, because I think this is because we know that we are constrained with the time, only 15 minutes. But then I think from the interview, we got a set of the answer from the respondents, and then they expand further in details in terms of what type of support, in terms of the network support, and then about mentoring, about coaching that they require, and then learning from the from life experience, or the someone who's already been there, done that, and then been successful in setting up. So we have got that level of details in which I think it would be too much to put it in only 15 minutes presentation. But thank you very much, Mutu. Yes, for your suggestion. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
I think we've perhaps got time for just one more question.
Yes.
Right. Hi, this is Mukesh Bhatt. My apologies for not turning my video on. I do apologize. I'm not quite sure how this is working. I've got the video turned off because of personal reasons, disability-wise, but I am an entrepreneur. I'm also a PhD student in law at Birkbeck. One of the issues that I have in terms of what you've described is you've talked about networks, planning, learning from entrepreneurs, and so on. But would not a suitable research and sort of topic also be the obstacles that the disabled entrepreneurs themselves face? Because when I hear the term network, my first issue is, how do I go out there and meet the people I need to talk to find out where to get the experience from, or the funding from, or whatever? And online meetings like this have been very useful in recent years, but once the lockdowns have ended, that opportunity has also disappeared. So how are these obstacles being overcome, and how else can we actually face this? It would be a good research sort of topic. In addition, I would like to point out that a lot of disabled people, whether they're working or whether they're just people at home in care, are also essentially have carers and personal assistants, and they have to manage their own finances, personal budgets, and so on. This is, by any definition, a business. And I would actually ask how much of this could be brought into the research sort of environment to sort of feed into not just what is research, but how to actually end up using that to guide policy and supporting the disabled entrepreneur. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in terms of the research regarding, I think the difficulty of A, finding where the networks are, B, accessing them. I think that's a constant in the literature, but admittedly that's a very small body of literature. Solutions not so much, but then what you've mentioned, the carers and the financial arrangements and so on, I think that's a very important point. We haven't been talking about it that much in existing research, and in a way that I think it's going to inform more specific tailored type solutions that's going to be suitable for, let's say, a specific country that would have different support structure in place, even though those support structure, may or may not work very well.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your question.
Thank you.
That,
yeah, thank you.
We're doing good
Thank
to
you.
timing. I'm sorry for the ping. I think that moves us very nicely on to our next presentation. And I'm now going to invite Professor Helen Lawton-Smith to present on regional equalities in innovation opportunities for ethnically diverse and disabled entrepreneurs, theory and practice. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the introduction, and it is a very nice lead into this. Jacqueline mentioned in her introduction that she's a visiting fellow at the CIMR, and that's because what we do in CIMR is engage with different constituencies, that we engage with policymakers and practitioners, and we communicate regularly. So in this audience, there are people that I interviewed as part of the project, and that's how I met Jacqueline. And what we can increasingly see is an interest in equality, diversity, inclusion in policy making, particularly in Innovate UK, which is why that they're funding the project that Jacqueline was talking about. But I'm just going to give a bit of background and sort of picking up on Mukesh, and I've asked him where he lives because it's all relevant to the kind of environments that people live in, whether they do have actual access to networks or whether everything has to be online indefinitely. So Tom, who is chairing the next session, and a couple of colleagues, Tim Vorley from the Innovation Caucus, and Baldina Awala from Sheffield, and Kate from Sheffield as well. We were commissioned by the Innovation Caucus, and if you don't know what the Innovation Caucus is, as most people don't, it's we can loosely call it a think tank of academics. So it's funded by Innovate UK and the ESRC, and the idea is to bring social scientists together to inform policy thinking. So if there was a question about social services or geography of disabled people or innovation strategies, those of us who are working in particular fields will be asked to inform the policy making, and they also hold events. But fortunately for us, they also fund projects. So the next one that Jacqueline has been talking about. So I got into this, and a YouGov survey of disabled and ethnically diverse entrepreneurs and innovators. And it was really about innovation and what kind of scope there was for supporting innovation as it was funded by Innovate UK. So we had focus groups. Tom organised one in Nottingham and I went up for that. Jacqueline organised one in Surrey. But it was a pretty comprehensive study. But where I came into this was that there was little about the geography of support for disabled and ethnically diverse entrepreneurs. So there was a bit in our reports, but as an economic geographer, I wanted to know more about regional differences and what opportunities there were. So the focus of analysis on the first one was the individuals, a bit like Ning and Tay's work. But my study, 2020 and 2021, was about the regions and what makes it special about the regions, about where you live and which organisations you work with, who are the missing organisations, how important is it to local councils and the chambers of commerce that the interests of different minority groups became part of their policy. So it was trying to investigate why it mattered where people were. And the first task of that was to map the geography of all the networks for both groups. So we did that and we found that there were lots of empty spaces, but I'll go into that in a bit more. And then, as I mentioned, this 2022-2023 project that we're launching now, and Tom's doing another focus group, which is great, and there are other people in the call that are doing focus groups. Next slide, please, Orla. Okay, so the starting point was we knew from previous research that equality, diversity and inclusion is not always mainstream, and that some of the challenges that individuals face is not being able to identify where they can get support. And part of that would be that there would be a lack of interest in some of these organisations for tackling these issues, which are very difficult. And as Ning and Taya pointed out, the challenges for facing individuals and the questions in the chat also highlighted the complexity and the different contexts and the different needs. So what we also is seeing then is this link between national and regional policy. So Innovate UK are interested in this latest project about how they can improve their offering to disabled entrepreneurs, and they've appointed a disability specialist, and they have bought into the idea that where people live really matters for policy design and delivery. And we're also looking outside to other countries to see best practice, and we find examples from the US and from Canada that can be valuable to for informing thinking in the UK. Next, please. Okay, so this is what we did. Employed a research assistant, was my PhD student, Dina Mansour, and we spent hours choosing networks, crossing them off, finding more, word of mouth. So we have an extensive mapping system of where the networks are for both groups. I interviewed 17 interviews with disabled and ethnically diverse networks, and also some individuals and policymakers as then. So with the questionnaire that I went through, a semi-structured one, and Jacqueline might remember, looking at what they do as an organisation, how they're funded, who they link with locally, what their challenges are, how they evaluate their own performance. Are they likely to be here in 5 years' time? Because one of the findings is that some of these really good initiatives in different parts of the countries have finished possibly because the EU funding ended. Yes, Brexit, thank you. And also that there wasn't sustainable income from local authorities. And also what they would advise policymakers. So we've got a set of recommendations. So next one, please. So this is the context as part of mapping where the networks are, to see if there was any commonality between the networks and where there is evidence of disabled people. It's actually much easier to do that with demographies of ethnically diverse people, because we know where there are concentrations of different ethnic groups of Asians or Black people in Birmingham or in the northeast. So what we're seeing then is disproportionately people with disabilities in the UK. They're in the southeast and Greater London, but there are parts of the UK where there is not much evidence of disabled entrepreneurs, and so this is, you can see the difference, and which might explain the absence of organisations. But what we also found is some network-rich places like Birmingham that has support for there's the Asian Chamber of Commerce and the African Chamber of Commerce. They weren't dealing with disabilities unless it was part of this intersectional dimension that I haven't really mentioned, but is part of this story. That it's, when we did the Innovate UK study, everybody says, well, why are we doing these two groups? And then we realised that there's lessons to be learned from different types. And also that there are, you can't necessarily say one is, we can't rule out the presence of intersectionality. And you can see Sam Everard in the chat. And Sam, I'm going to talk about your organisation in a moment, so I apologise if I get something wrong. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So this was, sorry, the one back, please. Oh, no, this is it. Yeah, sorry. This is the networking, and as I say, we looked at national initiatives as well. And we found three main categories: membership organisations, charities and commercial activities. So some organisations are profit making. They do offer services to their members for a fee, and that's how they generate their income. And others sort of work with getting grants from different organisations or from their members. And what was also surprising to me, which I didn't know when I started, how much interest there is in universities in minority entrepreneurship. So Monderam at Aston University, their centre CREAM is very important. And there are pockets of expertise we can see in Leicester, but also Jacqueline works with a group in Lancaster. And there is a general increasing sensitivity to the importance of investigating these topics, but also engaging with the groups that we that they are researching. So, for example, CIMR always invites people that we interviewed on the research project, the RSA project. So it's that keeping people involved. Thank you. So the next one, please. Okay, so this is a rare thing for CIMR to have an academic focused event. But what is nice that there are practitioners here and entrepreneurs, and Jacqueline herself is an entrepreneur but is also an academic and a researcher. So we started off with this regional stakeholder approach, looking at in each region who's actually involved and who's excluded and who's not included. So very often the sort of groups that you might expect to be interested in this, like the Federation of Small Businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, are not part of that. It's not part of their mission or their sensitivity. And I read a paper recently recommended by a student talking about marginal stakeholders, or I think it was a colleague, looking at why some people aren't included in networks is because of their marginal status in the economy. They're not seen to be of merit. And I think Jacqueline touched on that when she started. Everybody's talking about ecosystems now, entrepreneurial, inclusive, innovative, and I'm doing it myself. Baldina Owala from Sheffield and I have written a book chapter which talks about inclusive ecosystems, and taking Eric Stam's 2015 framework and applying it and saying this is how it works in practice for disabled and ethnically diverse entrepreneurs. And then the way I'm writing it now is that my former PhD student, Dina, and I are going to do a paper for regional studies, but that's probably going to focus on the ethnically diverse networks. Because when I gave this presentation in the department the other day, and Matthew's heard of this all before, she kindly suggested that it would be much better to split the analysis into two, because there's too much work in one. So what we're going to do in this networking approach is to look at the disabled entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is this regional stakeholder approach about agency, which has already been mentioned, about the networks acting as conveners. And when I give the example shortly, you will see why these networks act as intermediaries and are conveners of action to support different groups. And why it's important then to have alignment of stakeholders, of getting the people with the capacity to make things happen, to work together, but you've got to get them to buy into that. And I think that was part of the question. So it's looking about system change. I got told very firmly by UKRI, it's all about system change, but you need to understand where the system change comes from, why it happens, and who the people are that are going to develop that. And then we're also looking at the role of networks and social identity. We're also looking at the variability of regional contexts and who is actually included in the priorities in the regions. Thank you. The next one, please. And then this is entrepreneurial ecosystems. I'm thinking I'm talking long enough now. So there's plenty of work on entrepreneurial ecosystems, but it's about this mutually reinforcing environments between interdependent actors, and that's the framework. So what we're going to do in the networking one is to focus particularly on one particular aspect of that. Next one, please. Okay, so this is how we developed it for, it was ethnically diverse entrepreneurs, and looking at building inclusive entrepreneurial environments, starting at the local, but how the national, international builds into those. And also recognizing that people are starting from different points. They need different kind of issues, whether it's support workers at early stage. It's also about building confidence, getting themselves to the position when they can understand how to manage their conditions. Jacqueline, I'm hoping I'm saying this right. So it's not straightforward in building these. It needs specialist support. And I understand from one of the interviews that there is a lack of mentoring for disabled entrepreneurs. And that's something that perhaps can be addressed at the national level. And so we also, as part of the academic process, is to revisit what work has been done and to see what is working and what needs to be changed and built on. Thank you. Next one, please. So this is what Dina's come up with, this map. This is the academic element, bring the leadership together, access to knowledge, access to finance, some of the things that have already been discussed. Thank you. Next one, please. So this is this networking approach. I published a paper in 2000 something or other. I looked at networks of in the Oxford and Cambridge arc, but it's still relevant about network centrality and network rich and network poor regions, and how networks offer support and a service to participants as components of regional business infrastructure. So one of the challenges is when you do a study, there are always questions that you can't answer. So when Sharmista and I started talking about this paper, she came up with, how is it different if you were a disabled entrepreneur as if you were a non-disabled entrepreneur trying to get support to start your business? Well, I'm not sure whether they have the evidence for that, but we're going to have to think about it. Thank you. Next one, please. And so this is this, I thought I'd illustrate through an example of one case study about the importance of place and the network conveners of local stakeholders. And this network is unique in the Southwest. And because it's unique, it's finding a demand for its services eastwards and westwards, no equivalent activity. But again, there's that London-centric thing. That's where the money is, and perhaps some of the change makers are, that if this network was in London, it would have a different set of priorities and actions because of the access to resources. And when asked about who this network works with, you can see that very well linked to these organisations, but not the Federation of Small Business or Chamber of Commerce, because their entrepreneurs are not big enough. They're not going to be building into companies that employ lots of people and make lots of money. And there is this cost of joining a network if they're too expensive. But one of her tasks is advocacy, and this is one of the crucial things that the networks all do, is speak on behalf of their members and speak loudly. But it is still a very fragmented system, and their voices need to be heard a bit more. But one of the interesting things about this network, that she was one of the members of the regional stakeholder organisation for the Cabinet Office Disability Unit. She wasn't speaking about entrepreneurship, but there are some parts of government that do understand the importance of regions. Next, please. And then this is this ecosystems that this network acting as facilitator, intermediary, developing local leadership, and I mentioned the regional stakeholder committee. And then she provides peer-to-peer mentoring, her network does, and network graduates working as mentors. So there is a reinforcing pattern that when people go through the system, they remain part of that community and feed their expertise in. But it's always an issue of funding. Thank you. I'm nearly done. So next one, please. Okay, so we started with the assumption that regional networks are important. So I'm still a firm believer in that. The contributions will be about stakeholder approach and then the networking thing. So if we're going to write a paper with a networking approach, we have to distinguish it from the others. So last one, please. Okay, so this is where we're at. Regional studies, environment planning A. There's also a special issue of contemporary social sciences, the Academy of Social Sciences, and Jacqueline and I are working on that. And the Regional Studies Expo Association. And I'm also doing a couple of other things. One is about women leaders, drawing on the evidence of this study, and another book chapter is the importance of place. So thank you very much for listening, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Helen. And it did just, the thread there was wonderful, because one of the key things that does come out time and time again is lack of access to bespoke, holistic, inclusive networking. So it's very, very important. And we've seen from your work and others where this is done effectively, you can see significant growth on a number of levels. So it's a very, very important piece of research in terms of policy directives going forward. So we'll just open the floor for questions, if anybody has any questions for Helen. I think I can see a hand raised. Ola, can you see?
Yes, so we've got a question from Wilson.
Thank you.
Sorry, my system, Apple, didn't work very well with Teams. Thank you very much, Helen. Helen, I was just wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about your data, particularly who your interviewees, respondents were, and what they do? I'll tell you why in a second. But
okay.
I just wanted to know a little bit more about the context of your data collection.
Okay, so I got £7,500 of funding, and I committed to doing 25 interviews with networks, so about half each. It became incredibly difficult to pin people down to do those. So I think it's 16 or 17. And these were the leaders of the networks, all people who worked in the network. So the focus of analysis was the networks. And I did as much as I could to make sure that they were all parts of the UK. So Northern Ireland, Wales, East Anglia, South East was a waste of time. There was nothing happening in the West Midlands. So I did what I could. And you can see who one of the people I interviewed who's online now, to try and get a feel for what is going on. So I interviewed other people in the Southwest, but it tried to be a 50-50 split of the two groups to see how they differed and what challenges they were facing, but also what services they were offering to their members and how they were funded.
How diverse was your sample? I mean, here, diversity, because it would appear that a lot of entrepreneurs with disabilities or who speak up, come forward, are male, white, retired or semi-retired, and if they're entrepreneurs, then they're kind of doing self-employed work and not necessarily anything necessarily creative. I'm interested in the creativity part, which I'll go on in a minute. But I just wondered, about that the diversity, the type of or types of people who were your sample.
Okay, so the people I was speaking to were the networks with some additional entrepreneurs. So I spoke to a disabled entrepreneur who's also a South Asian entrepreneur. But it really was the focus of the networks to see who they were. But there was no criteria about them being innovative. So a lot of these networks were doing early stage startups in fairly traditional sectors. And so the question was, if you meet somebody who has the need for more advanced scientific understanding or engineering understanding, how do you deal with that? And the answer was, well, we know other people and that we will hand them on. We won't try and solve their problems. And that's the whole point about this networking collaboration, is that you work with other people and you can say, right, we got you through the basic skill set. And now for your business to grow, you really need to speak to somebody who understands the technology and the marketing aspects of that technology. Is that the sort of thing you're meaning? So there was no
Yes.
baseline. You don't have to have A-level maths to be part of this. But I wasn't talking to the entrepreneurs except as examples of people who were willing to speak to me about their experiences.
Thanks, Helen.
So I think we just got one more question from Jane.
I think I'm the association became providing this setup became the network that has not been successful because we cover the country and we try to set up networks in different parts of the country, but disabled people didn't want that. They wanted 24/7 support on the phone or email. So we changed the whole concept to provide that service. And that's what we still do. So please be mindful of the fact that the network might not work as they should. I think there is a very good match. It might not succeed because disabled people often want either tailored support or they want the answer there and then. So I think there are problems there.
You're on mute, Jacqueline.
That wouldn't help. Thank you, Jane. Can I just recap on that just to make sure that I understood that correctly? So what you're saying is that sometimes if you'd have tried to do networks in other parts of the countries in the real world, that in your experience, disabled people that you're working with would prefer to remain online and to have almost like a safe space where their needs were being met within that network. Is that what you're saying? And that you're wanting researchers to be mindful of things like that when they're taking this research forward?
And they want face-to-face support.
That they want face-to-face support on a more one-to-one basis.
Yeah. And that is always available to them.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I had trouble hearing that, Jane, but thank you very much for the comments. And I do understand what you're saying. So I think we do need to take account that one thing that the COVID pandemic has done is increase the usefulness of Zoom calls and team calls and making things more possible. That we have become more intimate with people over time as we use the technology. But that does then say, well, we've got so far online, but face-to-face, one-to-one is the way forward. So I think that's a really important aspect to this, that when we're advising Innovate UK, they need to understand that both are necessary. And I think that's a very good point. Thank you. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I think that's probably the only time we have for questions at this point. But I would like to say just to thank you so much, Helen. And it's, again, incredibly important. And the networks, in whatever way they present themselves going forward, the key thing that we're seeing at the moment in the anecdotal research, and that I think we put in the programme for you a link to the work done by Holland et al. And it reminds us that where people are not finding appropriate networks, they're creating, particularly disabled people and other minority groups, they're creating bespoke networks to meet their needs rather than engaging with the traditional networks. And I think that's really important going forward. Thank you so much. So we're going to now invite Wilson to present. And Wilson's going to be talking to us about new venture creation by challenged entrepreneurs. Thank you, Wilson.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm Wilson Ning. My colleague, who is online now, Felix Arndt, and I will talk about, I think, what's naturally following from Ning, Tay, and Helen's presentations on startup entrepreneurs, because we're interested in opportunity creation, the creative aspects, the black hole of entrepreneurship, which we want to investigate with serial entrepreneurs who are experienced in both for-profit and serial venture creation. Before I start, can I just say for Bart and others that for financing, I've a startup myself, a crowdfunding, financing startup, crowdfunding to attract, yes, funds, small funds, but they can add up to quite substantial from crowds, from publics, you know, generally. That I will write up when I get a chance. Venture is called Crowd for Angels. Crowd for Angels has a platform for people with ideas who are disabled and with impairments, particularly with sight, because I'm starting to have severe sight problems myself. So I've created a platform on crowdforangels.com. It's purely an online venture, and it crowdfunds, apart from other cryptocurrency things we won't get involved with. Our interest is in how severely challenged people create ventures, not as we've kind of been intimating and openly discussing, despite their impairments, but perhaps, and this is where we intuit, our intuition, my own intuition from my relatives who are impaired, severely impaired, and so on, is that they create because of their challenges, their obstacles, their barriers. So it's not to say that people we're looking at go and look for challenges, but they are challenged to create. And the creative aspects is what we're interested in, is the how, as I say. That is what we want to leave you guys and all of us to discuss. How do entrepreneurs generally create, focusing on entrepreneurs with disability, who cannot see, who have difficulty, like Mark Pollock in the cover slide, who cannot move at all without a number of carers. I will give a little bit about say a little bit about the structure. Is the first, we start off by defining a few concepts about disability in our cultural context of our research, and kind of leave you with some questions for discussion. So we'll try and keep this as brief as possible. We have two serial entrepreneurs we've been following for some time. We wrote up our preliminary findings of these two, Mark Pollock, as I've mentioned, and Caroline Casey, both who are well known in and beyond the entrepreneurship with disability field. We've created two themes out of our article, 2019 JBVI, Journal of Business Venture Insights, from our pilot. Theme one is of particular interest to us, but again, both themes are equally interesting from an opportunity creation perspective. Theme one is about late onset, people who suddenly, through accidents or through just their disabilities coming on late in life, like Caroline Casey, then create because of following their disabilities. And theme two is about people with lifelong disabilities and how they continue to fight barriers and to create ventures that as I've suggested, that exploit a number of their barriers. So both these themes is what we're focusing on. Felix will give a little bit of a scholarly literature context about where we locate our scholarly basis. I will then talk a little bit about data, and then we'll both chime in about findings and issues to leave you with today. Felix?
Thank you very much, Wilson. Good afternoon or good morning for me. Thank you for having us. I just wanted to provide a short literature overview on the ideas of where we come from, and building on Wilson's question of actually how ventures are created and how opportunities are created and then pursued potentially in a scalable manner, or in a manner that different ventures could evolve from that. And we're starting by the question of what motivates entrepreneurs to pursue ventures. And of course, there are naturally economic reasons that are similarly. But what we have found, particularly in our sample, is that often influenced by accidents, people also pursue social ventures. So most of these ventures that we looked at and that we have come across have a social aspect to them that is somewhat related to overcoming the challenges that in the first place were created through the disability or larger challenge that is related to this. And an interesting part in the literature is that there has been a wave of literature talking about mental challenges, ADHD and ASD. Interestingly, they ask quite a different question than we do, because they're really looking back into the literature of personality traits that we have largely abandoned after the 1990s. But the argument in the ADHD, ASD, mental health literature tends to be that there needs to be a more fine-grained approach to understanding traits that then result into emotions, potentially impulsivity, for example, and so on. So these are interesting aspects of actually redoing some of the work that then, as the authors in this stream argue, relate back to entrepreneurial orientation that has become a big stream more recently yet again, and looks at things like risk-taking and proactiveness, and how in particularly ADHD helps that, but also where the challenges come through inattention in this literature. So where essentially ADHD has positive but also negative impacts at the same time. And we are interested in a way what comes before in a slightly different angle on this literature, and asked how impairments relate to disabled opportunities. And that is also where our empirics will carry us, and also how opportunities develop into successful ventures. And by this, as Wilson already mentioned, we go a little bit beyond the idea of self-employment, but are particularly interested in ventures that create these opportunities that are exploitable beyond the individual. And I think with this, I return to you, Wilson, right?
Yes, thank you. Opportunity creation is our interest. Opportunity creation is where there is no existing supply or demand for products or services. And opportunity creation is about imagining future lives, contexts, needs, as opposed to satisfying recognized opportunities by opening a restaurant, or even a discovered opportunity where there's a supply or demand. So, you know, we're looking at the exploratory space, and therefore the exploitative perspective of entrepreneurship is rather less important than imagination. What do these entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, imagine? And then that leads to the how. Sorry, can we just progress to the data? So, which is slide 7. Next one. Yes, thank you. To explore our topic in our paper, JBVI 2019, I sent copies of that around. Please ask Ola or myself directly, Wilson Ning. I'm on the internet. Felix and I spoke to two principal respondents. There are others, but these were the two that we followed in a longitudinal case study approach, because exploratory, we didn't have any data apart from a pilot I'll mention in a minute. These entrepreneurs, and that's why we had two teams. These entrepreneurs were both cyclists. That's what we call, and that's not been discussed yet today, mentioned is invisible disabilities. You know, arguably when you have invisible disabilities, that creates a significantly greater challenge, because, you know, sighted people can't see you, and they imagine, you know, that you are, quote unquote, a sightless git, you know, because they can't see that we are cyclists. So invisible disabilities is theme 1. Theme 2 is visible disabilities, which have been discussed, create some challenges of their own. So that's one issue we want to raise for discussion immediately, and out of this workshop as well. It is a workshop. So that's theme 2, where Mark Pollock is both cyclist and paraplegic. Story to that won't go into. Our two serial entrepreneurs, they saw different journeys to creating ventures. Theme one, Caroline Casey. High risk involving no supply and no demand. Supply for, in her case, creating interest in employing people with disabilities generally. There isn't. We've talked about networks. A resource for large companies, any companies to engage and employ, recruit people with disabilities. It's not kind of lumping them together with others. And others, theme 2 is the low risk aspect of lifelong people with disabilities, involving Mark Pollock's recognized discovered opportunities. One example of discovered opportunities is his run in the dark, simply just organizing runs. Opportunity recognition. There are plenty of organizations who do the same thing, organizing run in the dark, discovered opportunity. So we went close to these two, each of them. Caroline, when she comes, they're both Southern Irish. Then they come to London. I meet and follow, used to follow Caroline Casey. 2-week stretches over 6 months before our JVVR article, recorded meetings, took notes, etc. Our research design was about trying to recreate this context in which we were participant observers. We researchers were participant observers. Next. We drew on an organizing framework based on 3 categories. Yes, we combined 2 categories of progressive disability and disability from birth when we observed that entrepreneurs in these 2 categories behave differently, similarly and differently. That's how we came to these 2 themes. Sorry, I've got a problem swirling around with my things. I don't know where we are. That slide is about Caroline Casey. She's all over the internet. She's legally blind. She's late onset. She worked in the finance industry as a management consultant until she became severely sight impaired. There's a talking link below that. You can't see this in this PDF. There we are, talking link, which we won't play, but if Ola, we can circulate these slides. Others can listen to how someone with sight impairment controls their time much better than me and others with sight can. She has become an icon. We were interested in her because she has created this this context for employing people, employability, for the employability of people with disabilities by engaging with what she calls the valuable 500 top, largest, wealthiest companies in the world, to co-opt them to sign up to pledges, like a minimum number of people with disabilities, etc. They engage with. So she's a social entrepreneur, particularly, but has other for-profit ventures. We wanted to concentrate on the social side because that was the creative side that we saw. Caroline developed skills to pursue her goal of getting 1 million people with disabilities into employment. This is where the valuable 500 need to sign up to that thing, that pledge. So a further topic we want to get discussed is how these people how people with disabilities, serial entrepreneurs with disabilities, create skills rather than focus on opportunities and then thereafter, rummage around in their repository looking for what skills they don't have. Caroline, we found matched acquired skills with public conception. So she's a public speaker. You can see her all the time. She has advertised events around town, particularly London. We've mentioned how London is a hub for a lot of things, networks, financing, and so on. But it's an engagement. It's the area for engagement, London and large cities, engagement with as the sighted and the people with money.
Wilson,
Next
I'm
slide.
sorry, Wilson, sorry to interrupt you because I've just noticed you've got 18, and do you want to? You've got 18 slides. And I think you're on number 12.
Yeah.
I can give you another 2 minutes.
Move on and go back to the findings. Move on to Mark and just say Mark's idea. Yeah, Mark is that theme too, and he's our lifelong person with paraplegia and so on. That we want to a kind of control person that we were interested in, but we were focusing on Caroline. Next slide, please. The findings which we were looking at, I'll pass to Felix, back to Felix.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wilson, for this great overview. At the core, really, in terms of personal challenge that may be drivers or translate into drivers for venture creation, we look at 4 different themes. One is obviously the economic one that I mentioned before. The other one is the social, cultural, that is focused on overcoming the public perception of disability, and also leveraging, as in Mark's case, audiences sympathetic to his conditions of paraplegia and the loss of sight, and leveraging this into, for example, public speaking opportunities as well, that then return money for his vision to cure his inability to walk. There are cognitive elements to this, resulting from the physical inadequacy following paraplegia or a sudden sight loss, that lead to drivers of either helping others, liberating the constraints of employees with disabilities, or in Adam's case, to overcome his paraplegia that he did not consider part of his life and still does not. And of course, there are also physical and emotional needs. So the outcomes of entrepreneurship might be much more multifaceted than only around well-being and financial well-being, as most of the literature conceptualizes. And this goes into exactly this construct of new venture creation and finding opportunities. And Wilson did a fantastic job of offering some of these as examples. And for us here, when we look at the personal challenges and the drivers, this seems to be interesting. But of course, because and these are great findings that we then need to leverage into more quantitative research to actually validate how these and whether these findings in different combinations or singly translate into certain attributes that are acquired, that then enable or trigger new venture creation. Similarly, possibly to the approaches I mentioned before that the mental health people have taken, where they say that mental disabilities have positive and negative effects at the same time. But of course, that is not possible in our small sample.
Yes.
So what can we learn from this? We learned that going well beyond the psychology literature that essentially says that people are predetermined in how active they are, that if there are events that trigger, in this case, entrepreneurial endeavors, and that there's heterogeneity between people independent of their prior motivation to be active, as psychologists would explain it, that then lead to venture creation. And this is a very central endeavor that we are trying to better understand of how these people become adaptive, overcome these challenges that go well beyond what most people face, and then become entrepreneurs that take the risk, but also overcome the drawbacks or the challenges, barriers that come with entrepreneurship, and become successful. And we believe that we can learn, of course, for this context, but also well beyond this context, of how entrepreneurs can overcome challenges and become entrepreneurs, how people become entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Wilson and Felix. I'm so sorry. I know it's,
yes, give me
yes.
1 second. How entrepreneurship education potentially can be influenced through what we learn from this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, an incredible presentation, really capturing what you might consider to be the essence of the disabled entrepreneur. And I love the concentration on creativity. And there's so much debate in this area in terms of the terminology and the support and the finance that goes to the different aspects of that interpretation. So you can't hear, Wilson? No, okay, all right. So we're going to invite people to ask questions now. Thank you.
I've lost sound.
Okay,
so I don't know whether you hear me, but I've lost sound completely.
Okay.
Maybe I switch off my camera.
We've time for just a few questions before we move into the panel. Helen? I think Helen had a question.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Hi,
Okay.
sorry. I thought this was a really, really useful and important contribution because it looks an aspect that we don't often do, that people say, well, disability covers such a wide spectrum. And there isn't much understanding of the differences in the experiences of people. And as you say, people who suddenly became disabled or somebody who was born with a disability. So I think this is hugely important. So I don't know how that translates into policy, because when we're talking about smaller groups, how do we design policies that pick up on specifics? Is there something general about dealing with people with blindness or people with degenerative diseases? It's a real challenge, but this work is really, really important.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen. Would you like to respond, Felix or Wilson, before we go on into the panel?
Well, this is a great point, and I don't think we are able to really answer that. And in terms of degenerative diseases, our feeling is that it seems to be a much bigger issue, and the venture creation part is a little bit weaker on this side. We don't really have data for this, so we can't really say. But our focus has been on sudden changes in health conditions. And there we see a lot of variation, and we do see some creation of ventures that results from that, possibly due to the discovery of certain unexpected elements to their lives that you don't have in these long-term in diseases that have a long-term impact on health and potentially lead to expected outcomes.
Okay, well, thank you.
Can I mention very quickly, Jacqueline? I didn't have time to mention my pilot survey. There's a slide there which suggests in answer to Helen, preliminary answer, that I think our the non-disabled population and the parameters that we create should, if we want to include diversity inclusion, people with impairments, is to consider that people with disabilities are of working age. They are not disabled in the sense of not being able to work. So I think a lot of these parameters need to be, including terms and words which we use, need to be changed dramatically. Disability is the wrong word. We know that. So what is the right word? Is for our scholars to debate and come up with suggestions, But we know that this disability, and particularly stuffing disability before entrepreneurship, creates a false impression, particularly from my pilot, because almost all of the sample that I looked at, 200 plus of pilot study respond, were of working age, except they mostly were unemployed. They're not unemployable, they're unemployed. Something for us to leave with.
Thank you. Very, 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 very valuable comments. And equally, when we talk about the terminology and a holistic response to this in terms of you know, a sort of generalized level of excellence of support that can bring into that support specific targeted where it's needed is something that the sector seem to be asking for, and a reinforcement of not only the word disabled but its true meaning, because this, you know, as you perhaps rightly are trying to intimate, this is also an area to recognise that disabled people who wish to create enterprise, one of the most significant barriers is that they are being disabled in that arena rather than enabled to be an active participant within it. So terminology is very, very important. So thank you so much to our presenters today. We're now going to move on to our panel, and I invite Tom to chair our panel, please.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Hello, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Tom Coogan. I'm currently, as soon as I start speaking, my office becomes noisy. I'm currently in a very cold office, my lovely corner office at Nottingham University Business School, where I teach on entrepreneurship and innovation, and I also have a little sideline where I'm teaching focused in researching entrepreneurship, and particularly disability and entrepreneurship. So I've worked with Helen before, and I'm working with Helen and Jacqueline at the moment, as they've mentioned. And yeah, the topic for the panel discussion is what are the future directions for research for disabled entrepreneurs? And I guess also something that occurred to me listening to the presentations is really most of us academics, we're not just doing research now, we're doing teaching as well, and we're also doing a lot of kind of knowledge exchange and kind of engagement with industry and other third parties. And I think a lot of the presentations have kind of spoken to those two aspects as well. So I think maybe that's something we might consider under the kind of the general consideration of research, so research into knowledge exchange and research into teaching. So yeah, so what do we need to do next, basically, and maybe we could start off with Ning and Tay, if we go back to the beginning. Your thoughts on that?
What do we need to do differently? To me, it's when it comes to researching about the group of population that doesn't include me, it's always quite challenging in that way. Even, you know, when we think we've talked to enough entrepreneurs with disability or disabled entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, we never seem to quite know enough, because I think, as we have alluded to also from Wilson and Felix's work, is that there's so much variation in this area. So to me, it's the basic sort of the foundation of how I'm trying to approach this area is that of participatory research and so on, because it's quite difficult. So for us, we're interested in this from entrepreneurship point of view. We didn't really have formal background in social studies or disability studies, but we think something needs to be done. So there's difficult, or not difficult, at times challenging dynamics right there. To me, I always relate back to, you know, when I look at research in, say, international business, and when they research the Asians, and they say all kinds of crazy things. So to me, I mean, am I doing that with you know, disabled people or disabled entrepreneurs? So there's always something new to learn, and I don't think we could afford to be voyeuristic, if that's the word, in the way that we approach the subject or the people who are participating in it.
And then I think, but to add on to what Tay just explain in terms of the methodology and how to do it, the topic itself, I mean, because Helen's and Wilson, Helen's doing the research, focusing on the network and support. And then Wilson and Felix is they are doing the research in relating to the creating, spotting the opportunity, seizing the opportunity. Well, I think the area of the research kind of complement into those areas, simply because we are looking at if how can we help developing as part of the support? How can we help developing the skills, the competencies, and then the needs of the entrepreneurs with disability to help them successful and to help them succeed? So that is something to add on to what Tay just talked about in terms of the research method.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing that occurred to me during your talk is I was kind of looking at the slides you had with the kind of the barriers and the competencies, and I was thinking it seemed to me a lot of those barriers are kind of do feed much more into the kind of policy kind of context and the kind of broader sort of social and economic systems. But on the competencies side, I did think, well, I wonder whether there's more to be done there with things like business modelling. So I've inherited a module I'm teaching at the moment on business modelling, and in particular using the business model canvas. And that's been quite an interesting experience of just, rather than dealing with kind of ideation or identifying opportunities, just giving people a grid of things to fill in that all kind of lead on to each other, and a much more kind of systematic sort of nuts and bolts thing. And that's been quite interesting. So I wonder whether there's maybe some research to be done on kind of the tools we use in kind of business modelling.
Yeah,
I think that needs testing actually with a pilot cohort that we're going to deliver the training to. I think that's one of the key things, because for people who are very new to businesses, it does help to actually have something that prompts them to say, who's going to pay for this? Are the people paying using your services, and so on and so forth. So it does force them to be more specific, but that's a thing where we're going to try to test as well.
We've got a question from Jane. Jane, do you want to go ahead? I think you're on mute at the moment, Jane.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now, Jane.
What we have discovered is that in our many years of supporting disabled people in business, is that they don't tailored support, i.e. they might want to ask questions. We find out if we don't know the answer, we find out the answer. And so I think quite a lot of people want the answer straight away, rather than in the time. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand?
Sorry, my speakers aren't that great, I'm afraid. I'm having a little bit of trouble.
Jane, if I can just jump in there, Tom, if that's helpful. Again, just for, are you wanting to say, to a degree, that actually people have done a lot of work in this area? Disabled people themselves know what is required, what support they're going to need, and that any research going forward should be engaging collaboratively on the breadth of knowledge that they already have, rather than trying to come up with a perhaps a new toolkit
Yeah.
when we've already got it. It's not necessarily that we need to be people developing a toolkit for us. We need people to help us develop the recommendations from our skills and lived experience to influence policy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just to reflect on the conversation, there is a thing called the Working Parliament Committee in the House of Commons. They are doing an investigation on Plan for Jobs. I was fortunate to appear on that panel, and one of the questions was of 7% of disabled people. So I think there are other ways of trying to get the politicians involved, but by doing papers to those sorts of investigation.
And you're right, that particular bill is very important for disability and the creation of enterprise. So you're right to point that out as well. So and I think you're right to reinforce a very key area for researchers to be mindful of in terms of engaging the community in this process. Thank you.
Thanks. That also led me, Helen, to think about your work and the kind of the regional sort of approach. So I wondered, with the sort of the Labour Party is kind of hinting that if they get into government, they're going to have a kind of a cluster-based approach to the economy and to regional development. So the idea of kind of integrating sort of universities with kind of industries or the key industries in certain areas. And I was just wondering sort of how you thought that might fit in terms of if we superimpose the kind of networks of support for disabled entrepreneurs and more general networks of support for disabled people, would that be kind of productive potentially, do you think? Is that an opportunity?
Yes, thank you for raising that. Yes, I don't know where we are with the levelling up agenda, but the other main parties seem to be more serious about it. I don't know whether Michael Gover's, but definitely bringing the universities into play, because we know that there are pockets of research, and of course Ava's on the call. She works with Mundarama Aston. She's doing lots of work in this area, so there is scope for utilising that research and building some of the networks and working with existing networks. What I don't like to see is duplication, that people are starting to do new things when there's already potential there, or there's the stuff that has happened in the past but for whatever reason has died, usually lack of funding. But I think that's a very good point, that we need to look at that, and part of my report was looking at the universities. So, and you yourself, would you like to tell us what it is that you do with your Ingenuity Lab?
Yeah, so it's an interesting example here that we're lucky enough to have the Hayden Green Institute, so my little kind of academic department around innovation enterprise. We have the Ingenuity Lab, so we have a kind of a space for local entrepreneurs and also student entrepreneurs to kind of engage, and then that's also a point of interaction with what are called our entrepreneurs in residence. So that's kind of a wider network of sort of practitioners, and in theory and again in teaching, they all kind of interact, and so that's why I was kind of interested in the research and the knowledge exchange kind of and the teaching aspects of these, because
yeah, I think that's important. There's obviously scope for a paper on this to do this, and there's also at Northumbria University, Nigel Coates, that is part of our project team. They're getting their master's students to work with autistic entrepreneurs and do projects with them. And I think they're great initiatives. They're not large scale, but they're a start and they're an important point of the fabric, and it might stimulate other people to do something in a slightly different area and not do the same, but see the opportunities. And the thing for us, part of this project that Jacqueline and I are doing is a literature review, and we've got a colleague who's doing a big trawl of the literature on disability research. And somebody said to me the other day, there's nothing we know about Nigeria, but what she's uncovered is a massive literature. There's a very good paper from Iran, papers from Africa and Asia on disability research. And I think that needs to be highlighted, that there are challenges around the world, and there is an increasing international recognition of the importance of disability entrepreneurs. And I think for myself, is if the Regional Studies Association would give me money, I'd go back and ask the networks, for example, Sammy, what's changed for you in the last 5 years? Did you get your 5 million that might enable you to do something wonderful? Because there is a frustration. You do a piece of work and you've dumped it. I'm writing a paper, and I've been for a while now. I interviewed 164 high-tech firms in Oxfordshire in the 1980s, and I went back to them a few years ago to ask them how they've got on. Of course, not many of them are left, but some of them are. And I wanted to see how the region has changed and how they have changed and what the interconnection is. And there's scope for doing that kind of research on this topic by asking people who are actively involved what's making a difference to their lives and the people they work with. That's my 2 pennyworth. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot. And then I guess to Felix and Wilson, what do you think we need to be doing next as a field? Either of you?
I think Wilson might still be struggling, and I think
Here we go. I just managed to unmute myself. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Felix,
go ahead.
Since I think the number of areas, I say, focused on what these entrepreneurs with disabilities do, particularly with severe disabilities, as I say, rather than just myopia or not to trivialize early stage stuff, but not about people trying to find their feet, but the people who are genuinely thought through, as in our sample, for example, and looking at opportunities because of their disabilities. So it's not necessarily trying to overcome. I think that's our perspective, as I say, not entrepreneur perspective. So there's more of I think much more of a need for data-based, data-focused research that listens. To what people, entrepreneurs with disability, are trying to tell us. It's not necessarily that they want to overcome. They would love to. People like Mark spend their whole lives trying to create exoskeletons, etc., to be able to walk again, etc. But that's not their focus. That's what we found. That's overcoming these disabilities. It's the opportunities and the creative aspect of coming up and of overcoming the risks, if you like. I think if there is anything to be overcome, it's the risk aspect. That left-handed side of our brain, which we have intuited. There is an important trigger. We're not psychologists, occupational psychologists. We need to understand how that trigger works, and that trigger may be set off by late onset, sudden accidents, disabilities that minimizes this typical human constraint that we all have with venture creation. The risk aspect. All others think typically, culturally, economically, got no money, etc. Do these people worry? We hear big examples in the market, Tom. These people need to be looked at more carefully from what they are, rather than what we would imagine them to be. People like Elon Musk, in the news all the time, does he feel any risk? How does he manage his risk and his multiple issues? Clearly he doesn't have the approach that we have. So what approach does he have, to venture creation?
Thanks, Wilson. I'm very aware that we're very short of time. We've got 10 minutes left. We've got a question from Eva. Eva Kasparova, hello. Haven't spoken to you in a while. Go ahead.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone. It's really great to join you at this event. Thank you so much for organizing. I really enjoyed all of the presentations, and it's really good to hear what everybody's working on. I just wanted to say hi and kind of maybe just chip into a conversation about future research and really just draw some connections between the work we've been doing at CREM recently. And I mean, I've joined CREM, so sorry, just to introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Eva Kasparova. I'm a research fellow at CREM at Aston University, the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. I joined CREM a couple of years ago, and what I found really interesting working at CREM is just seeing the huge gaps actually that there are in understanding disabled entrepreneurs compared to ethnic minority, migrant entrepreneurs and other groups. Going back to the point that Jacqueline made at the start, what I'd like to see in future, maybe, I'd like to see much more research looking at the contributions of disabled entrepreneurs and people with long-term health conditions who start a business. Both the economic, the social contributions, contributions to innovation, both process and product innovation. I also would like to just go back to the points about enterprise policy that you and leveling up. You may be interested in our Time to Change report that we published early this year, where we set out a number of recommendations for advancing the UK's ethnic minority businesses. Again, some connections can be drawn there with disabled entrepreneurs. We know that both ethnic minority and disabled people are often more entrepreneurial than general population. They're more likely to start a business, but they face particular barriers in growing their businesses and into more mature firms that generate both stable income and jobs over time. And some of the kind of things that we highlighted in our report was, the lack, actually, if you look overall across the UK, the lack of an inclusive enterprise policy that will actually send signals. When you think about regions, that will actually send signals to local decision makers about the importance of this agenda, the importance of inclusive entrepreneurship, and provide some kind of guidance on how to go about developing more inclusive business support ecosystem at the local level. And the other kind of key observation from our report was that some of the best practice examples in supporting ethnic minority businesses, looking at Canada, US, several countries in Europe, show that particularly in times now when resources are constrained, partnership working across sectors, often with public sector leadership, are really vital in providing long-term support ecosystems for underrepresented and disadvantaged groups of entrepreneurs. I'll stop there, but thank you very much for everybody's presentations. It was really good to join the discussions.
Indeed, thank you very much. Okay, we should probably be wrapping up. Remind me, Jacqueline, have we got a forum we can kind of move on to share further thoughts for this? Oh, you're on mute, sorry. Oh, no, you're muted again.
It's just not playing today. It's not playing today. I do have some concluding thoughts, and also, yes, I think the thing is, this is the continuation of the conversation. Obviously, both through the work that CIMR Birkbeck are doing and the research that we're going to be taking forward. Do you want to comment on that at the moment, Helen, in terms of how people can communicate going forward, and then I'll just conclude.
I think I'd like to hear from Abby to see what Abby, she's got a hand up. Would you like to?
Thank you.
Is my microphone on or off?
Yeah.
On.
On, okay. Oh my gosh, I just feel so overwhelmed. I think this is the most exciting.
Can't hear you.
Yes?
I think it's the internet. You were cut off a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for a fantastic event. I wish there were more. It's my first, but I find it moving and inspiring. And I work with many people who are affluent and less affluent, and who are disabled, if you want to use that word or not. I just think they're amazing people who have hidden and visual challenges, and I feel very honoured to be a part of this community here. And I think that the comment I'd like to make is that I'd like to make you all more accessible as a group, so that it's really so there's no barriers to being able to speak in confidence and share ideas and give access to all people. And I think that that could be a very exciting way to move forward. And thank you very much indeed. And I'm very much excited about being part of the academic community with Wilson, and I look forward to practical collaborations too. Thank you.
Thank you. But if we just to pick up on that point, we hadn't really thought through about how to continue this dialogue.
Yeah.
I think it's Ning, would you like to?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming in and then contributing such interesting topic and then debate. And then I think this one is it is kind of continuation from last year that that we organized. And then, well, if you may permit, Helen, I mean, well, it seems like there's a need for the continuation of the conversation, and then also pick up on your point in terms of looking back in terms of from where we start, and then see how we progress. And I think perhaps if CIMR would like to host this topic, like at least once a year, that would be great for us to keep updating the group and then the community on where we are at. If that's would be permissible from the CIMR.
Yes, it would. And I'd like to thank you, Ning, for putting all the hard work and bringing this community together, because I didn't know your other speakers. Obviously, I know you for a long time, but I didn't know our other colleagues and the ones who weren't able to speak because they were poorly. And I think that's really important that we draw on each other's networks. So we're thinking of having one on finance in the summer term for minority entrepreneurs, and we could make that a focus. So Abby, is there anything how would you like to involve more within the group? You're on our mailing list.
I'm in a very unusual situation in that I'm very excited to be potentially doing my PhD with Wilson, and though he's in France and I'm in the UK, so I'm not on a campus. And I think as well, when you're not physically able to get out and about, I have relatives with impairments, if you want to describe it in that way. I can't always get out and about. I'm quite restrained. I'm online, and there's a joy in being out in the real world. But I think there can be a hybrid universe for us all where we can all meet. And I've spent so many years working with amazing creatives with challenges, and I've been in and out of their houses and their flats and their apartments, and I've helped them into big corporate offices and out again. And I work with so many people who've got so many different ideas. They're so challenged, and they're yearning to be part of this environment. And I feel it's wrong that we aren't giving them access. And I feel that we should all be speakers online to these groups.
Okay, well, why don't you write to me and tell me what you're doing, and then we can involve you, and then we can have a conversation and see how we might organise some of these things. But thank you for joining us and for your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Ning, do you want to
Okay.
wrap up? We need to thank Ola.
Yes, and then thank you. I think thank you, Ola, first of all, to make this event happen, and then without Ola's help and support, we wouldn't be able to come together. Thank you so much, Ola, and then thank you, Helen, for and Jacqueline, and then for giving this opportunity to for this workshop to happen. And then thank you, Felix, Wilson, thank you, Tay, Tom, and then the all the participants, and thank you so much. And I hope to continue this conversation with all of you in the future. And thank you. And Helen, we are going to put together a blog.
Yes.
And then a blog, and then capture what we have discussed today, and then that will be out to everyone in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Have you got time to do a first draft, and I'll add to it, and then
yes.